The U.S., in a bid to repair tensions with Israel, has sent Adam Zubin, also dubbed the U.S. sanctions czar, to Israel in a 3-day engagement of high-level talks on the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal to reassure Israel the U.S. will intensify sanctions on Hezbollah and combat Iran's, quote, malign activities. We have joining us in studio today, along with Elliott Philippe Assouline, international relations expert. Welcome. We'd love to know what you think. How are the Israelis feeling about this?
Thank you for having me. The Israelis now, it's almost unique in the history, are united in opposition to this deal from right to left. There's a lot of opposition to how Netanyahu has managed it. Now, I think Obama may have some success selling some people on the deal with this idea of sanctioning Iran's proxies, but he's going to have an uphill battle because the deal so far has been sold as something that resulted from sanctions failure. And now we're being reassured the Israelis are being reassured and the American public is being reassured by being told that sanctions are the solution here. And Iran's proxies are basically Iran's arms. So it's a bit counterintuitive. On the one hand, Iran is being freed of sanctions, going to have a lot of money. On the other hand, its strategic assets in the region are going to be neutered, supposedly, according to these sanctions.
Was such an interesting take on sanctioning their proxies. That's exactly what the U.S. Under Treasury Secretary said that he was going to do with, quote, thanks to those congressional sanctions, our sanctions against Iran's proxies carry the international way and designated entities become pariahs worldwide. So they're, you know, that was sort of his reassurance here, but I don't know if Elliott agrees with us on that or not.
No, I mean, I think engagement is the kind of the watchword that the Obama administration and the rest of the G5+1 have undertaken, and it's interesting to see that there's been the staunch pushback that's happened in this country that hasn't been mirrored elsewhere in the rest of the world and the rest of those other negotiating countries. I'd be interested to know
it's a very good question.
Your thought on that.
It's a very good question. There's a different political culture in European countries when it comes to foreign policy. You don't often see any opposition or mass opposition or widespread debate about such issues in general, whereas you see it a lot more in America. Specifically regarding the Iran issue in Israel, from the beginning the Obama administration said to the Israelis, basically, let us handle this. And so the two countries' politics with respect to this issue became completely enmeshed. And it's also a political point for the Republicans here. They're using this as another, battering ram against the Democrats. So it's complicated all these issues, and it's developed. There's a very fierce opposition here, I think, with a lot of merit, much of it. But the difference with the P5 in the European countries, I think, is based on the political culture of those countries. And here, maybe with an exception for the Brits, there was very fierce debate about the engagement in the Iraq War, but that's also like an Anglo-Saxon country where you might have a bit more similarities. I wouldn't expect this to happen in France.
But what of the validity of engaging? Rather than, to your point, it depends on how you spin it, but sanctions have failed, okay. We can argue that, and you can argue that they would have had the bomb in a period of time. But
I don't believe that, but that's what's being said.
Okay, but what of that argument about engaging and bringing them into the fold?
Iran?
Yeah. Where do you see merit in that, or do you think that they should be squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until they're compliant?
So this is the core question. I think it's the most important question. The Iranian people are very much ready for democracy. And you could have something that really succeeds there in an inspiring way, I think, for the region. The same way Islamism in Iran inspired other Islamist movements, you could have democracy inspiring other people in the region. If you give this regime something akin to nuclear weapons, it's like rewarding a criminal, and nobody's going to want to stir the pot with a nuclear regime. You're not going to take that risk in that area where you have ISIS now and other groups. So engaging, I am entirely for, but I think it needs to come with some squeezing of the regime, targeted to the regime. Ultimately, ideally, I think the solution long-term would be to have regime change, in which case it wouldn't even matter if the Iranians have nukes. I think the way the engagement is done now makes that impossible.
So so go ahead.
Not to cut you off, but I just heard you say we should squeeze the regime, which is exactly what we didn't do. And my diplomatic colleague here would say, well, this deal, I'm assuming you would say it was necessary, it was needed. We can't police the world, but at the same time, I mean, did we not, in fact, just do the opposite of your recommendation?
I believe so. I think the regime has been considering the alternatives somewhat coddled by the Obama administration. I spoke to one expert at UCLA who said the Obama administration wants to get out of the Middle East, and so it was cashing its chips. There's definitely not been, in my opinion, enough support for the people, for changing the discourse within Iran. And I believe a deal was the way to go, but I don't think this deal does enables engagement in the way we might want it in the West.
Just pulling this back really quickly before we wrap this up, Netanyahu said that we had a moral duty to stop the implementation of this deal. And the fact that we send our sanctions czar to Israel, but he doesn't actually meet with Netanyahu, he meets with their national security advisor, their foreign ministry, their energy ministry, but never the prime minister. What does that say about our relationship and our continued relationship?
There is a solid bedrock of relationship between the people of America and Israel, between the political and military classes. There is an absolute disaster of a relationship, I think, built on both sides, but I put a lot of blame on Netanyahu between the leadership. And this is where Netanyahu is experiencing fierce criticism for how he managed this relationship and this issue of Iran. The Israeli people are united exceptionally in opposing the details of this deal, not a deal, the details of this deal, but they are very much critical of how he's handled it. And I put a lot of blame there. The fallout is yet to be seen. I think I hope it's going to be limited to the administrations, and they're going to change eventually. I think there's a common bedrock of shared values, especially now with the Middle East in turmoil.
Do you have a follow-up to that, Elliott?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's several questions that could flow from that, but in terms of the interesting point, I suppose, is the fact that they've sent this diplomatic mission to clearly try and smooth over. They clearly feel as though that relationship's in danger of becoming irreparably damaged, to the extent to which how much backstairs dealings and conversations can we expect to be going on? Presumably, this is something that just goes on.
I think there are masses of it now. It's not just with the Israelis. The Arab countries, the Sunni countries are very much opposed to this deal.
And the Saudis as well.
Yes, they just do it a bit more covertly. They're a bit more polite about it. I think they may also be worried that the Israelis might do something rash. They may be fed up with Israel's messaging being effective with certain parts of the American public and political class. There's a lot of things. I'm not sure the relationship is what is concerning Obama now, because he's not been shy about being very critical of Netanyahu in public and
well, specifically with the West Bank settlements, that's principally the
among
main.
Others.
That's among others. Sure, he's not been a lone voice in the United Nations, etc., etc., etc. But I think that's been the main. And that's, to your point, that's within his own party and within his own country, people have felt that he's been a little too aggressive in that. So I hear you there. So I guess that what you're saying is that the relationship is becoming a little fractured.
And it's been for a while. Or the former Israeli ambassador, Michael Oren, a distinguished historian and really a diplomat in the best sense of the term, wrote a book that's quite alarming. Now, I take issue with some of his positions. He's a bit too loyal to Netanyahu for my taste. But he was talking about really within the administration, when they're not in front of the cameras, real suspicion and almost hostility to Israel. And on the Israeli side, there's a complete distrust of Obama. Even though his policies have, until recently, I would say until last summer, been fairly good, there's not a sense that there's a genuine affection there. Sure. And in a region that's so dangerous, that's necessary. You need to make people feel good, not just give them what they need.
We'd love to know what you think at home watching this about Zubin's emphasis on the U.S. committing its relationship back to Israel, wanting that increased cooperation. Let us know what you think about this story. Also, my colleague's point of view and our expert here. While you're at it, be sure to check out the rest of our channel and, of course, subscribe to the LipTV for more.